Lieutenant Mira Jackson straightened her collar for the third time in 5 minutes, a nervous habit she'd never quite shaken. The gleaming hallways of the Galactic Military Academy stretched before her like a chrome intestine, all curves and reflective surfaces designed by species who apparently never heard of right angles. The place smelled like antiseptic and privilege. First day jitters, Lieutenant. The administrative AI's voice purred from somewhere in the ceiling, its tone just condescending enough to make Mira wonder if the programmers had purposely coded passive aggression into its personality matrix. Just making sure I look presentable for the skeptics, Mira replied, dropping her hands to her sides. Not every day the Academy gets its first human instructor. Indeed, most unusual, the AI agreed with synthetic enthusiasm that failed to mask its doubt. Your species has only been part of the Galactic Confederation for 7 standard years. Mira bit back a sarcastic response. 7 years in space was apparently equivalent to being a toddler in galactic politics. Humanity was the new kid at school, a kid everyone expected to eat paste and fail basic arithmetic. The doors to the faculty chamber hissed open, revealing a menagerie of alien instructors. Some floated, some slithered, some stood on too many legs, and all turned to stare at her with various arrangements of eyes, sensory stalks and optical ridges. "Ah, the human arrives," announced Dean Thrix, a towering avian creature whose feathers shifted between shades of blue depending on his mood. Currently they were a skeptical periwinkle. "We were just discussing the experimental nature of your appointment. Glad to see I'm already the hot topic of conversation," Mira said, flashing her most diplomatic smile, the one that showed teeth but not too many teeth, an important distinction when dealing with species that considered visible dentition a threat display. An amphibious instructor with translucent skin revealing a disconcertingly visible circulatory system leaned forward. "With respect, Dean, I question the wisdom of allowing a human to instruct advanced tactical operations. Their species only discovered faster-than-light travel because they stumbled upon a crashed Tellurian scout ship, and redesigned it to work twice as efficiently," Mira countered without missing a beat. "We're good at improvising." A ripple of skeptical murmurs circulated around the room. Mira recognized the universal sound of academic harumphing across multiple species. "Lieutenant Jackson comes highly recommended," Dean Thrix noted, his feathers smoothing slightly. Despite her species' limited experience with galactic affairs, her personal combat record is impressive. "Impressive for a human, perhaps," rumbled a voice from the back of the room. The crowd parted to reveal Commander Dravok, the legendary Umbraxian combat master whose silicon-based biology allowed him to shatter concrete with a casual tap of his finger. His obsidian skin reflected the room's light in disorienting patterns. "I mean no disrespect," he continued, clearly meaning every ounce of disrespect, "but humans are physically inferior to 97% of sentient species. Their bones break easily. Their skin tears. They lack natural weapons." He gestured dismissively at Mira with an arm that terminated in crystalline blades instead of fingers. "What could she possibly teach our cadets?" Mira kept her expression neutral. She'd heard it all before. Humans were too soft, too fragile, too squishy. What the galaxy had yet to fully appreciate was that these limitations had turned humanity into the most creative, adaptable, and occasionally terrifying species in the known universe. "With permission," Mira replied, keeping her voice level, "I'd like my methods to speak for themselves." Dean Thrix's feathers shifted to a contemplative azure. "Very well, you'll begin tomorrow with the third-year tactical cadets. They're a challenging group, challenging as in exceptionally gifted, or challenging as in exceptionally difficult?" Mira asked. The faculty room filled with the various sounds of alien amusement, clicks, whistles, subsonic rumbles, and one concerning squelch. "Both," the dean replied, "and they've already been informed they're getting a human instructor. I suggest you prepare accordingly." As the meeting adjourned, Mira caught whispers and translated snippets from the universal translators mounted on the walls. "Won't last a week. Humans barely understand gravity manipulation. Heard she was only appointed to satisfy diversity quotas." Mira had expected the resistance. Humanity was the cosmic new kid after all. What they didn't know, what her classified service record carefully omitted, was that she hadn't been selected randomly. There were political reasons certainly, but there were also practical ones. Because while humans might not have natural armor or venomous appendages or telepathic abilities, they had something far more dangerous, a talent for turning absolutely anything into a weapon, including their apparent weaknesses. And Lieutenant Mira Jackson was about to teach the galaxy's best and brightest exactly why humans had earned their reluctant place among the stars, one decisive victory at a time. First lesson scheduled for 0800 hours. The galaxy's most elite cadets were in for one hell of a wake-up call. Mira's first class was scheduled in Training Arena C, a cavernous hexagonal space with adaptable gravity, temperature, and atmospheric controls. The Academy spared no expense when it came to simulating the diverse combat environments its graduates might face across the galaxy. Too bad they couldn't simulate basic courtesy. As she approached the instructor's entrance, a massive figure blocked her path. Commander Vrix, the Academy's most decorated Draconian combat specialist, leaned against the doorframe with practiced casualness that nonetheless managed to take up maximum space. His scaled skin shimmered with iridescent greens and golds, and the retractable claws on his four-fingered hands gleamed under the hallway lights. Everything about his posture screamed territorial display. "Lieutenant Jackson," he said, drawing out her name like it was a mildly interesting scientific specimen. "I was beginning to think you might have reconsidered your position, and missed the warm welcome." "Not a chance," Mira replied, keeping her tone light despite the knot forming in her stomach. Draconians were notorious for their dominance hierarchies and equally notorious for their sensitive egos. "I've taken the liberty of observing your personnel file," Vrix continued, his vertical pupils narrowing. "Impressive for a human. 5 years in your species' special forces, whatever that means on a pre-interstellar world. Some conflict called Afghanistan. Hardly compares to the Centaurian blood wars or the siege of Proxima B." Mira maintained eye contact, careful not to blink too much. Among Draconians, excessive blinking signaled submission. Different challenges, different skills. "Indeed," Vrix huffed, a small jet of steam escaping his nostril slits. "I'm sure teaching agricultural colonists to point projectile weapons was very quaint." The casual dismissal of her military service stung, but Mira had expected this. The galaxy at large considered Earth's conflicts to be minor skirmishes, barely worth mentioning in the context of interstellar warfare. They didn't understand that humanity's gift for violence had been honed over millennia of fighting each other before ever reaching the stars. "I'll be observing your class today," Vrix announced, like he was bestowing a great honor upon her. "The cadets should have at least one qualified instructor present." "How thoughtful," Mira replied. "Always nice to have an assistant." Vrex's scales rippled with indignation, the color shifting toward crimson around his neck frills. In Draconian culture, assistants were barely a step above servants. "I am not," he began, then caught himself, forcing his scales to smooth. "I merely wish to ensure the cadets receive proper instruction, even during this experiment." Before Mira could respond, the student entrance hissed open, and a parade of the galaxy's most elite military cadets filed in. 27 beings representing 18 species formed a loose semicircle, each wearing the standard-issue gray training uniform adapted to their particular physiologies. Some differences were subtle: extra armholes, specialized neck supports. Others were dramatic: the Aquarian cadet floated in a personal water bubble, while the magmaform student glowed with barely contained heat. All shared the same expression, however, skeptical curiosity tinged with prejudgment. "Attention," barked Vrix, and the cadets snapped to their species equivalent of parade rest with military precision. Mira stepped forward. "At ease. I'm Lieutenant Mira Jackson. I'll be your advanced tactical operations instructor for this semester." A Vespidian cadet, insectoid, with compound eyes and gleaming chitinous armor, raised an appendage. "Permission to speak freely, Lieutenant." "Granted," Mira said, already anticipating the question. "Is it true humans can't regenerate limbs? That seems like a significant tactical disadvantage." Several cadets chittered or huffed in their species' version of laughter. "It's true," Mira acknowledged. "We also can't breathe underwater, survive in vacuum unprotected, or shoot energy beams from our appendages. Any other observations about human physiology you'd like to share?" The cadets exchanged glances. A bulky Tauran student with 4 arms and a reinforced exoskeleton spoke next. "With respect, Lieutenant, why would the Academy assign a physically inferior species to teach combat tactics?" Vrix made a sound that might have been a poorly disguised snort of amusement. "Excellent question, Cadet." Mira paused. "Gronks," the Tauran supplied. "Cadet Gronks, let me answer with a question of my own. How many sentient species currently serve in the Galactic Confederation military?" 346 recognized species, ma'am," replied a slim violet-skinned Medusan with tendrils where hair would be on a human. "And how many of those species have subjugated another spacefaring civilization without outside assistance?" The room fell silent as the cadets puzzled over this unexpected question. 17, Mira continued, when no answer came. 17 species managed to completely dominate another spacefaring species before intervention. Humans are one of them. "That's impossible," interrupted Commander Vrix. "Humans have only been in space for—" "I'm not talking about aliens," Mira clarified. "I'm talking about ourselves. No other species in the Confederation has tried harder to exterminate itself than humanity." For thousands of years, we've been our own greatest predator, and yet here we are. She began pacing slowly in front of the cadets, her boots making sharp sounds against the training floor. You look at me and see a fragile being. No claws, no armor, no special abilities. What you don't see is that every single combat technique in the Confederation database was developed to counter natural advantages. When your species evolved retractable claws, she nodded toward Vrex, mine invented knives. When others developed armored hides, we created weapons to pierce them. When faced with enemies faster and stronger than ourselves, we designed strategies to neutralize those advantages. Vrex's tail swished with irritation. A charming history lesson, Lieutenant, but hardly relevant to modern galactic warfare. Isn't it? Mira raised an eyebrow. The most dangerous predator isn't the one with the biggest claws, Commander, it's the one that never stops adapting. Perhaps a demonstration would be more instructive than philosophy, Vrex suggested, his tone making it clear he thought he was calling her bluff. Theory only goes so far. A ripple of anticipation moved through the cadets. This was getting interesting. What did you have in mind? Mira asked, though she already knew the answer. Draconians had predictable patterns when their authority was challenged. Vrex's scales flushed with dominant display colors, bright golds and reds pulsing along his neck and arms. A practical exhibition, you and I. Basic combat principles demonstrated for the cadets' benefit. Wonderful idea, Mira agreed with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I was hoping you'd suggest that. As the cadets cleared space in the center of the training arena, Mira caught whispers being exchanged along with what appeared to be some form of digital currency. The odds were clearly not in her favor. Commander Vrex removed his instructor's jacket, revealing impressively muscled arms covered in protective scales. He stretched dramatically, his shoulder joints making audible popping sounds as retractable bone spurs extended slightly from his elbows, not fully deployed, which would be against regulation, but visible enough to remind everyone of their presence. Standard demonstration rules, he announced loudly for the benefit of the now attentive class. First to yield or become combat ineffective loses. We'll keep it simple for the lieutenant's sake. As Mira removed her own jacket and moved to the center of the training circle, she caught the Medusan cadet muttering to her Tauran neighbor, "This is going to be embarrassing." Mira pretended not to hear, but silently agreed with the assessment. It was indeed going to be embarrassing, just not for her. The training arena's environmental controls hummed as they adjusted to the standard combat demonstration settings. Earth normal gravity with slightly elevated oxygen levels. Mira suspected this was Vrex's first concession, a way to justify his inevitable victory. After all, he could claim he'd been sporting enough to fight on human terms. Cadet lyrics. Vrex called to a lanky pale blue humanoid with 4 eyes arranged vertically down the center of their face. "You'll officiate." The Quartanian cadet stepped forward nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the responsibility of mediating between 2 instructors. 4 eyes blinked in rapid, unsynchronized patterns, a sign of anxiety in their species. "Commander, are you certain this is authorized?" Lyrics asked, voice barely above a whisper. The Academy protocols for instructor demonstrations usually require Dean approval and medical staff present. "This isn't a formal combat assessment," Vrex dismissed with a casual wave. "It's an educational demonstration. Lieutenant Jackson has graciously volunteered to help illustrate some fundamental principles about leverage and structural vulnerabilities." The emphasis on structural vulnerabilities wasn't subtle. Mira maintained her neutral expression, happy to assist in any way that benefits the cadets' education. The students had formed a perfect circle around the demonstration area. Some were visibly excited by the unexpected entertainment, while others seemed concerned about the ethical implications of watching their new instructor get humiliated on her first day. The quiet exchange of betting continued, with holographic displays discreetly showing the constantly updating odds. Mira noticed that the odds against her had climbed to 21. One unusually small cadet, a Nanovian whose species evolved on a high-gravity world, giving them dense musculature packed into a compact form, approached Cadet Gronks with a data tablet. "I'll put 50 credit units on the human lasting at least 2 minutes, the Nanovian said, their voice surprisingly deep for their size. Gronks laughed, the sound echoing metallically through his exoskeleton. "Your generosity to new instructors is admirable, Plex, but misguided. I'll take that bet, and give you 3-1 if you want to make it interesting." "Deal," Plex said, finalizing the transaction with a thumb press. Vrex performed an elaborate series of stretches in the center of the circle, each movement precisely calculated to display his physical superiority. His tail swished methodically, disturbing the air with audible whooshes. Draconians were not subtle when establishing dominance. Traditional or modern rules, Lieutenant? Vrex asked loudly enough for everyone to hear. I wouldn't want to overwhelm you with the full Confederation combat protocol on your first day. Whatever you're comfortable with, Commander, Mira replied, doing only basic arm stretches. Though I should mention that humans typically prefer a defined rule set before engagement. Old habit from our primitive warfare days. A subtle shift occurred in Vrex's demeanor, a momentary uncertainty quickly masked by confidence. He hadn't expected her to push back on the rules. Very well, Confederation Standard Class 3 engagement. No weapons, no intentional severe injury, victory by submission or functional incapacitation. He smiled, displaying rows of precisely serrated teeth. I believe that's civilized enough even by human standards. Perfect, Mira agreed. Cadets, Vrex addressed the class, observe closely. The first principle of interspecies combat is recognizing physiological advantages and exploiting your opponent's structural weaknesses. As if on cue, he flexed his forearms, causing his scales to ripple impressively. Several cadets nodded appreciatively. The message was clear: scales beat skin, every time. Cadet Lyrics raised all four arms in the traditional starting position. Combatants ready, Vrex took a wide stance, his center of gravity low and stable, his four-fingered hands open and ready to grapple. Ready, Mira simply nodded, standing casually with her weight evenly distributed, hands loose at her sides. She looked almost bored. Begin, Lyrics declared, swiftly moving back to join the circle of spectators. Vrex didn't move immediately, clearly expecting Mira to attack first, a common mistake made by those facing a supposedly inferior opponent. When she remained still, he circled slowly to his left, analyzing her posture for weaknesses. In combat against physically superior opponents, Vrex lectured while moving. Weaker species often depend on speed or trickery. Notice how the lieutenant is conserving energy, likely planning a desperate evasive strategy. Actually, Mira countered, still not moving from her position. I'm just waiting for you to finish your lecture. Where I come from, it's considered rude to interrupt a teacher. Scattered laughter rippled through the cadets. Vrex's scales flushed crimson along his neck ridge, the draconian equivalent of an angry blush. Perhaps we should focus less on theory, and more on practical application, he growled, suddenly closing the distance with impressive speed. His first strike was deliberately telegraphed, a sweeping right claw aimed at her midsection, slow enough that she could dodge but fast enough to look impressive to the observing students. Mira sidestepped easily, maintaining her casual demeanor. Vrex nodded appreciatively, as if her basic evasion had confirmed his teaching point. Good reflexes for a human. Notice, cadets, how even minimally trained species can develop adequate defensive movements. The condescension in his voice was palpable. He launched into a more complex series of attacks, a left jab followed by a low tail sweep designed to unbalance her. Mira evaded both with economic movements, using just enough energy to avoid contact. You're very agile, Vrex conceded, increasing his pace slightly. But evasion isn't victory. Eventually, a weaker opponent tires. True, Mira agreed, ducking under another strike. That's a universal principle. The question is, who tires first? For the next 30 seconds, Vrex executed increasingly complex attack patterns while Mira continued to evade, never countering, never engaging directly. The cadets watched with growing interest as the commander's movements became marginally less precise, his breathing slightly heavier. Is running away the primary human combat technique, Lieutenant? Vrex taunted, now fully committed to the demonstration. Your species' historical records suggest a preference for direct confrontation. Just giving the cadets a chance to observe your form, Mira replied, finally shifting from pure defense to a more neutral stance. But you're right, humans do prefer efficiency when possible. Without warning, she stepped forward rather than away from his next attack, moving inside his guard in a manner that seemed to surprise even Vrex. She made no aggressive move, simply positioned herself where his momentum carried him past her. First lesson, she announced to the class. Position before submission. No technique works from the wrong position. Vrex recovered quickly, turning with a growl that was no longer purely theatrical. His next series of attacks came faster, with genuine intent behind them. Claws whistled through the air centimeters from Mira's face, as she continued to evade, now with noticeably more effort. Second lesson, she continued, slightly breathless but still composed. Energy conservation. Commander Vrex is expending approximately 4 times the energy I am. In prolonged combat, this becomes significant. This observation visibly irritated Vrex, whose next attack, a powerful downward strike with both hands, contained enough force to potentially end the demonstration. Mira pivoted at the last moment, allowing his claws to strike the training room floor with a resounding crack. A momentary silence fell over the previously murmuring cadets. That strike would have caused serious injury. Getting frustrated, Commander, Mira asked quietly, just between them. That wasn't very sporting. This isn't a sport, Rex replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous register as his instructor persona momentarily slipped. Your species needs to understand its place in the galactic hierarchy. The tension in the room shifted palpably. What had begun as an educational demonstration was veering into something more personal. Mira sensed the change and adjusted her stance accordingly, her previously casual demeanor hardening into something more focused. I couldn't agree more about understanding one's place. Their eyes locked, and something unspoken passed between them, a mutual acknowledgement that the demonstration had evolved beyond its original parameters. Rex's next attack came without warning or pretense, a blindingly fast combination that would have incapacitated most opponents regardless of species. His claws extended to their full combat length, a clear violation of demonstration protocols, as he launched himself forward with predatory intensity. Time seemed to slow for the observing cadets, as their draconian instructor transformed from teacher to aggressor, his scales now fully flushed with combat coloration. And then something unexpected happened. Instead of attempting to evade again, Lieutenant Jackson stepped directly into the attack. The room collectively held its breath. What happened next occurred so quickly that several cadets would later request footage from the training room's security monitors to verify what they'd witnessed. As Rex lunged forward with what should have been a match-ending strike, Lieutenant Jackson sidestepped with mathematical precision. One fluid motion redirected his momentum, exploiting the secondary elbow joint that was the one weakness in draconian skeletal structure. First principle of human combat, Mira announced clearly. Use your opponent's momentum against them. Before Rex could recover, she pinned his dominant arm behind his back. Her right foot hooked his ankle, further compromising his balance. Second principle, control the critical points. Every species has them. Rex's scales flushed with embarrassment, a mottled purple pattern racing across his neck. Each time he attempted to counter using his superior strength or natural weapons, his movements were redirected with disturbing efficiency. Notice, Mira continued, her voice steady despite the exertion, how Commander Rex relies primarily on inherent biological advantages. This is common among apex predators. They often develop blind spots regarding their own vulnerabilities. With a surge of strength, Rex created enough space to face his opponent. His expression had transformed from confident predator to something far more primal. Enough demonstration, he growled. Let's see how human technique holds up against genuine draconian combat protocols. Without warning, he struck out with an open-palmed slap that cracked through the air, a dominance gesture in draconian culture reserved for disciplining subordinates. Several cadets gasped at the blatant insult. Mira's hand intercepted Rex's wrist with precision that bordered on precognitive, stopping the motion cold. Her expression shifted, the professional instructor replaced by something older and far more dangerous. That, she said quietly, was unprofessional. What followed defied expectations. Lieutenant Jackson stepped inside Rex's guard with unmistakable offensive intent. Her free hand struck 3 precise points along his arm, targeting pressure receptors that even most draconians didn't know existed outside medical textbooks. Using his temporarily compromised balance, she executed a hip throw that sent his 200-kilogram frame through a perfect arc. He hit the floor with an impact that reverberated through the deck plating. Instead of recovering, he found himself pinned by techniques that simply shouldn't have worked against his physiology. The entire sequence, from attempted slap to complete incapacitation, had taken less than 3 seconds. Commander Vrex's combat ineffective, Cadet Lyrics announced with confusion and awe. Lieutenant Jackson wins the demonstration. 27 cadets from 18 species stared in collective disbelief at the Academy's most feared combat instructor flat on his back, immobilized by a human who showed no signs of strain. Mira released her hold and stepped back, offering a hand to help Vrex up. An excellent demonstration, Commander. Your willingness to illustrate vulnerability points was most educational for the cadets. Vrex accepted her hand with as much dignity as he could muster. Unexpected approach, Lieutenant. The cadets have certainly learned something today. That's 300 credit units you owe me, Gronks, announced Cadet Plex with a wide grin. The training room erupted in excited chatter as betting payouts were calculated amid exclamations of disbelief and laughter. Mira straightened her uniform casually. I believe we still have 30 minutes of class time remaining. Shall we continue with the scheduled curriculum, Commander? By all means, Lieutenant, Vrex agreed, his professional training reasserting itself over wounded pride. The cadets would benefit from understanding the techniques you employed. Though I should clarify that what I demonstrated weren't special techniques, Mira noted, addressing the class. They were fundamentals, applied with precise knowledge of comparative physiology. Contrary to popular belief, humanity didn't earn its place in the Confederation through natural advantages. We earned it by studying, adapting, and turning knowledge into action. By the time class concluded, three things had become abundantly clear. They had severely underestimated Lieutenant Jackson, they had severely underestimated humanity as a species, and tomorrow's class was going to be standing room only. By the following morning, Lieutenant Jackson's demonstration had achieved legendary status. The Academy's internal communication networks buzzed with embellished accounts, unauthorized footage, and animated reenactments of the human instructor who had demolished the feared Commander Vrex. Mira entered the faculty lounge to find a conspicuous bubble of silence surrounding her usual table. The alien instructors who had been so dismissive yesterday now observed her with a potent mixture of curiosity and wariness. Lieutenant, Dean Thrix greeted her, his feathers a contemplative shade of indigo. I must say your instructional methods are unorthodox. I believe in practical demonstrations, Mira replied, pouring herself a cup of what passed for coffee in the academy, a bitter alkaloid solution that tasted like someone had described coffee to a sentient fungus, who then tried to recreate it from memory. Yes, well, the dean continued, feathers rippling slightly, Commander Vrex has filed a rather interesting report. He suggests your understanding of draconian physiology exceeds what's available in our educational database. Mira sipped her pseudo-coffee. I did my homework. Indeed. Enough to identify pressure points that aren't documented in standard xenobiology texts. The dean's head tilted in the avian equivalent of raised eyebrows. Points that coincidentally are classified in Confederation military archives. Are they? Mira kept her expression neutral. Dean Thrix's feathers shifted to a knowing azure. I took the liberty of reviewing your service record more thoroughly. The unredacted version. I wasn't aware there was an unredacted version, Mira said carefully. There isn't, officially. The dean lowered his voice. But those of us with certain security clearances can read between the heavily blacked out lines. A thin crystalline instructor Mira recognized as Professor Helix from Advanced Xenobiology approached their table. Multiple jointed fingers clutched a data tablet nervously. Lieutenant Jackson, the professor began, voice chiming like delicate glass. I wonder if I might consult with you regarding some unusual techniques you demonstrated yesterday. For academic purposes only, of course. Of course, Mira echoed with the hint of a smile. Perhaps we could discuss it over lunch, Professor Helix suggested. I've been researching human neurological adaptability for several cycles, and your demonstration suggests some fascinating implications for cross-species training protocols. Before Mira could respond, the faculty lounge doors hissed open, revealing Commander Vrex. The room fell silent as he scanned the assembled instructors, his gaze finally settling on Mira. His scales had returned to their normal coloration, though he carried himself with slightly less swagger than the day before. He approached her table with deliberate steps, and stopped at a respectful distance. Lieutenant Jackson, Commander Vrex, she acknowledged. How's the arm? Functional, he replied stiffly. The medical staff were quite impressed with the precision of the nerve compression. No permanent damage, just as you intended. I'm glad to hear it. An awkward silence stretched between them until Vrex finally cleared his throat. I've had several inquiries from senior cadets requesting transfer into your tactical operations class, including some from the fourth-year group. My group. Mira raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Yes. Apparently your demonstration yesterday has generated significant interest. His jaw worked as though the next words required physical effort to produce. I would be willing to coordinate our curricula. Perhaps some joint sessions would benefit the cadets. Coming from a draconian, especially one of Rex's standing, this was tantamount to a humble apology and an offer of professional alliance. Several nearby instructors pretended unconvincingly not to be eavesdropping. I think that's an excellent idea, Commander, Mira said. I'd welcome your expertise. Vrex nodded stiffly and turned to leave, then paused. One question, if I may, Lieutenant. Of course, those pressure point techniques. They're not standard human military training. It wasn't quite a question, but Mira understood the implication. No, they're not. I thought as much. Vrex studied her with newfound respect. Humanity's official military history mentions nothing about specialized xenophysiology units. That's correct, Mira confirmed. Our official military history mentions nothing about them. Understanding passed between them, a mutual recognition that certain operations existed in the spaces between official records. Vrex inclined his head slightly, a gesture of professional acknowledgement, before departing. Dean Thrix waited until the commander was out of earshot before speaking. You know, Lieutenant, When the Confederation Council suggested including a human instructor at the academy, there was significant resistance. Many believed it was merely a political gesture. And now? Mira asked. And now I believe I understand why certain highly placed individuals insisted on you specifically. The dean's feathers rippled with amusement. Your service record describes your role in Afghanistan as cultural liaison and tactical advisor. Curiously vague terms. Mira shrugged. Bureaucratic terminology, you know how it is. Indeed. Just as your current assignment here is officially described as facilitating interspecies tactical exchange. The dean's eyes twinkled. One might almost suspect you're evaluating the academy as much as we're evaluating you. Before Mira could respond, her communication device chimed with an incoming message. The academy's administrative system was requesting an urgent curriculum update. Her class had been moved to the largest lecture hall to accommodate the sudden surge in enrollment. Additionally, 3 senior Confederation military officials had registered to observe her next session. It seems your demonstration has attracted some high-level attention, the dean noted, glancing at the notification. The Admiralty rarely takes interest in first-year instructors. I'm just doing my job, Mira said, finishing her coffee and standing to leave. Teaching cadets that appearances can be deceiving, a lesson many of us apparently needed to relearn. Dean Thrix conceded. As Mira turned to leave, he added, Lieutenant, the Confederation has existed for millennia, by incorporating the strengths of each new species. I'm curious, what do you believe is humanity's greatest contribution? Mira considered the question carefully. Most species evolved to dominate their environments. Dean Thrix. Humanity evolved to adapt to them. We don't just survive change, we thrive on it. As she walked away, leaving the dean contemplating her words, Mira allowed herself a small smile. The academy thought they were preparing the galaxy for humanity. In reality, they were preparing humanity for the galaxy, and the universe beyond had no idea what was coming. By the end of the first week, Lieutenant Mira Jackson's Tactical Operations course had become the most sought-after class at the Galactic Military Academy. The lecture hall was filled beyond capacity, with students from advanced years requesting special permission to audit her sessions. Even several senior Confederation officers had taken to dropping in unannounced, ostensibly for inspection purposes, but clearly there to witness the human instructor in action. As Mira crossed the central courtyard on her way to the officers' mess, she noticed how differently the other species now regarded her. Where once there had been dismissive glances and barely concealed smirks, now came respectful nods and curious observation. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Her fellow instructors were reassessing not just her, but humanity's place in the galactic order. It seems you've become quite the celebrity, Lieutenant, said a melodious voice behind her. Professor Helix fell into step beside her, crystalline form catching the light from the Academy's artificial sun. The cadets have a new saying, don't judge a species by its exoskeleton, especially if it's a human. Mira laughed. I suppose that's progress, though I'd prefer they focus on the tactical principles rather than the species demonstrating them. That's precisely what makes you dangerous, came another voice as Commander Vex approached from a side corridor. His scales had settled into a respectful blue-green hue. Most species rely on inherent advantages. Humans study, adapt and overcome. Was that almost a compliment, Commander? Mira raised an eyebrow. Vex's mouth twisted into what might have been a smile. An observation, Lieutenant. Though I must admit, it's one I should have made sooner. As they reached the entrance to the officers' mess, Dean Thrix waited by the doors, his feathers a contemplative shade of violet. Lieutenant Jackson, the Confederation's Strategic Command has requested a series of special seminars on human adaptive combat techniques. It seems your little demonstration has reverberated beyond our academy walls. Mira nodded, containing her satisfaction. I'd be happy to oblige, though they should understand one thing clearly. And what's that? Asked the dean. What I demonstrated was just the beginning. Humanity's greatest strength isn't in what we already know, it's in how quickly we learn. As she entered the officers' mess alongside the very instructors who had dismissed her only days before, Mira couldn't help but think about Earth's long bloody history. Millennia of conflict had forged humans into the ultimate adapters, beings who turned disadvantages into strengths and weaknesses into weapons. The galaxy had welcomed humans grudgingly, expecting a primitive species that would take generations to catch up. Instead, they had gotten Lieutenant Mira Jackson and others like her, representatives of a species that didn't just join the galactic community, but was rapidly redefining it. The galaxy wasn't ready, but then again, it never had been.